Good evening, everyone, and welcome to. Is that going to disappear? All right, we'll just wait for a second to get enough. Try a second time. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I will pass over to Rebecca just to do a little bit of housekeeping before we start.
Good evening. Please note that this meeting of the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. For those in the room, please note if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the surface car park at the front of the building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on laptops. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Moving on to item 1, are there any apologies for tonight?
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies from Councillor Felicity Rice and Councillor Joe Clements.
Thank you. And substitute members?
There are no substitute members for this meeting.
Great, thank you very much. Item number 3 is declarations of interest. If any councillor have got any disclosable community interests, can you let me know now, please? And I'll take that. Oh, that's Sandra.
Yeah, can I just, it's just a personal interest. I'm a trustee in the Teach Trust, which is part of Camfty's junior school, and it's mentioned in the reports on item 7.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moore. I'll be more formal. Okay, and moving on to item 4, which is the minutes of the last meeting. Is the committee okay to approve that, or are there any comments on the last minutes? No, if we can approve those then, please, by consensus. Excellent. Thank you very much. And item 5, any public issues?
There are no public issues this evening, Chair.
Okay, brilliant. And that can move us straight on to the meeting and onto item number 6, which is the planning service improvement update. I'd like to welcome Wendy Lane, who I think is going to be introducing this paper for us. And over to you, Wendy. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Earl, do you want to introduce as well?
Thank you. Yes, I'm very happy to introduce it, but I'm sure as you all know, this is a fairly operational issue by nature. So Wendy's going to do the bulk of answering questions around this. But I just wanted to reflect. Obviously, the backlog now for our planning service has been in place since, well, for a very long time, but in April 2021, there was a plan to try and deal with this backlog, try and get the number of applications that were in our current planning system down, and get things dealt with at a much quicker pace. We do have a planning improvement board, which is part of that, which is what I sit on as the portfolio holder for this area. I just want to point out that there has been really significant progress on this. I've been very impressed with the teams, particularly with our planning officers who have been working under an incredible amount of pressure, and particularly alongside planning policy we've had coming through, such as the local plan. We've also had some changes in senior leadership as well, and they've kept on with dealing with this and prioritising it even during that. Just to have a look at the main points, we're currently at a point where the backlog has been reduced to 50% of what it was previously, and we've got rid of all those applications that were dating back as far as 2015. You know, there's really old planning applications that have been sitting in the system for that long. They're all gone now, and the focus now is on that early 2022. Just looking at ongoing performance, though, you know, we are monitored externally by the government, by DLUC, and we seem to be at a place where we're within what they would demand of us, so we don't require any sort of intervention. But I just want to also recognise that I think there's still a way to go, and as we're sort of chipping away at this backlog and breaking down the barriers that cause it, we do have that really good news that we've been able to get £100,000 from the planning services skill delivery fund to try and help tackle that backlog and keep us on that trajectory of improving. So I'll hand over to Wendy if she'd like to take on. Thanks.
Not a lot more for me to say, really. I mean, what I would say is it's a journey. Planning improvement is never something that you just stop. It's something that has to continue. There are planning must be one of the most popular parts of government because it's forever changing. Whenever we feel that we've got a planning system that we understand, there's changes. There's probably been more changes in the last 15 years than there was in the 15 years before, which shows how long I've been kind of working in planning, with lots of changes, obviously permitted development rights. Most of those are done for really good reasons, and when they bed down in the system, they deliver benefits, but they take time for the system to understand how it's going to work. At the same time, planning is not the most popular profession. It's really hard to recruit planners, and equally there is sometimes a belief that planning, anyone can be a planner, and all I would say to that is we have to go through qualifications, we then have to be certified, and go through chartered status. That's actually quite a convoluted process that takes a lot of evidence to do so. I'm very proud to be a planner and a chartered town planner, and I'm very proud of the outcomes that have happened during my career. And I just hope that people understand the value of the advice that's given. But it is an art, not a science. And so there is often interpretation. And that's why we have the role of planning committee, for example, to be able to weigh up some of those factors and to be able to make different balances, because it is a weighing up the benefits versus the disbenefits. So what I was trying to just do is kind of give you that higher level understanding of how planning is going. But I can't take a lot of credit, obviously, for what's been done. And as Councillor Earle has highlighted, the team has worked really hard. There's been a lot of movement, but there is still a long way to go to deliver the service that everyone can say they're utterly proud of. And obviously that has resource implications to keep that level of service going. So happy to take any questions if that works within this agenda.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and sorry to overlook you at the start, Councillor Earle. It's been a while since we've had a portfolio holder come in. So yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you very much. Yeah, this paper is really good. We've been looking forward to getting this in, and on a personal level, from engaging with planning officers, I think we have seen an improvement over the last few years, particularly with the quality of information and reports we've been getting back through the planners, and particularly myself, I can only speak for applications I've been involved in our award level. And I have noticed an improvement across the board when I've been in communication with them. So that's been really welcome. This paper, I think Councillor Doughton Gibson was the first to bring this to us and raise this to come and ask for it to be looked at. I don't know whether you wanted to begin with any questions, or I could throw it open to the committee and see. No? Would anyone like to begin? Or I can just Councillor Ricketts.
Thank you. It's been very disappointing just recently to see applications that are being referred to the inspectorate due to non-determination. I wonder what measures you're actually putting in place to ensure that this doesn't happen, because obviously it's a risk of cost to the authority. So can you sort of expand on what measures you're putting in place to ensure that this doesn't happen in the future? Thank you.
Well, not necessarily want to get into the detail of that particular planning application. Non-determination appeals actually are quite rare. If that was a particular circumstances that generated that, they do happen. They can happen at any point past the statutory determination timeframe. So if you don't have an extension of time, that's what they can do. Obviously, the more of a backlog, the more of applications taking time, that's more likely to happen. That wasn't necessarily the issue for why that was referred. And obviously that particular application is going to planning committee for an update tomorrow. So as I say, it doesn't seem to be an endemic problem. That was a particular issue with that application, which will be discussed at planning committee tomorrow.
Thank you. There were actually two just recently.
Thank you. And do you want to come back on that at all, or do you want to speak about the individual cases themselves outside of this committee? Okay. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, can I refer to paragraph 11, page 13, and also on paragraph 42, page 18, which mentions that the council's been awarded 100,000 from the Planning Skills Delivery Fund. Can you clarify what that money is going to be spent on? And will it cover the additional member training for the 2 new planning committee meetings that is just being put in? Thank you.
Yeah, do you want to come back on that one?
Yeah, thank you. So the Planning Skills Delivery Fund is to deal with backlog. At the moment, the council is using agency staff to assist with taking down the backlog. That revenue money is greatly in excess of the 100,000 as highlighted about in the report about agency staff, and that therefore will assist with the amount of money we've spent on agency staff to assist with that backlog. A case was put in for that. That isn't related to a training budget. It's purely related to backlog.
Do you want to come back? So,
well, it's just that we're going to have the 2 new committees, and I was just hoping there'll be a bit left over for some planning training, because it will actually help to clear the backlog if we're able to have the 2 committees, because then it'll be dealt with quicker, or that's the idea. It's just a thought.
Yeah, Councillor Earl, I know that's in your portfolio, the split of the committees. I know it's really recent, but have you got any comment on that?
I think the split of the committees is something more around having a really well functioning, really open and transparent system, and being able to have that representation from all, our 2 sort of sides of our conurbation, considering it is so huge. Other areas have area committees. It's something that we've really lacked. So it's more about the system rather than actually dealing with the backlog. The backlog is more for these very historic applications that have been sitting in there for a long time, which aren't getting moved on. It's not so much that there's a hold up at committee stage. The hold up is either a little bit further before in getting that decision, and also working with our consulting with external organisations as well. So even though planning committee being in 2 parts is going to be a good thing for residents, I don't think that it will actually have too much of a consequence on the backlog. Thanks.
Thank you. While we're speaking about the split, there's been some figures put at the moment, I think, in the local media around 100,000, which kind of ties in a little bit with this 100,000 in the paper mentioned. Have you got any idea about what the actual cost will be for the splitting of the committees?
Thanks, Chris. That's a really good question, and as far as I can recall, on the paper that went to audit and governance, and then obviously was where those minutes were approved by council, I believe that we were putting £41,000 of additional resource into TAG and planning. So TAG, which is the Transport Advisory Group, to again offer a bit more transparency on those transport decisions that we make. And then the additional amount of money was for some of our reworking of the committees and making sure that we have a scrutiny that can actually follow what's going on within the council and do that additional work. So that's my understanding, but I'd happy to be corrected. I can see Jess has got her hand up.
Yeah, Jess, do you want to come in?
I didn't actually put my hand up for that point, but I think you're right, Councillor Earl. That is my understanding as well. The 2 points that I just want, if you don't mind, Chair, that I just wanted to respond on was firstly the point around the agency staff and how we've been using those to manage the backlog. But just to emphasise the point that I think you've probably heard us talk as officers and the Cabinet a lot around reducing our agency spend, because that is an efficient way of working, and looking to grow our own planners, use apprenticeships, use other training mechanisms to grow officers to become planners, and looking at things like where we're reducing services elsewhere and people want to be retrained, bringing them into the planning department. And Wendy's already hit the ground running, doing some thinking in that space. The other point I just wanted to pick up on was the point around member training. And absolutely, Earl and I and the leader and I have had conversations with Democratic Services about how can we ensure that we're really giving the planning committee and if it's 2 planning committees, the future structure of the planning committees, the training that they need to do the best job they can and really understand, make the best decisions they can. And so absolutely we're looking at that, but that is separate from that backlog funding.
Thank you. Councillor Earl, did you want to come back in?
Yes, sorry, I was just going to clarify. I have seen some information in the media, which is this accusation of having £100,000 of allowances for councillors, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, from our financial implications on that audit and governance paper, the only additional allowance would be to have a second chair of planning committee, of our second planning committee, and that would be estimated at 10,834. So yes, I can confirm it was not an additional allowance apart from a special responsibility allowance for that chair because of the work they have to do to do that. And of course that is set not by us as a council, but by actually an independent panel who looks at the work that we do and makes a decision on what we should be remunerated for our time. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can I just ask, continuing just on the staffing side of things and the use of agency staff, what is the current split that we're looking at between employed staff and agency staff with planning officers at the moment? Have you got a figure for that at all?
I know that at the moment we've got 16 agency members of staff. So I think that is about just under a quarter of the total staff.
Thank you. Next, we've got Councillor Northover.
Thank you. I was just interested in the merging of the IT systems, and I also wondered how that feeds into what we see on the public website, whether or not that's going to change or maybe even improve. Maybe. Thank you.
Yeah, so the report includes an update on MasterGov. So that's going to be the new system that replaces the existing 3 legacy systems, which obviously provide access via the website at the moment. I must admit, I find it really hard because I'm not familiar with the area and I'm obviously trying to look up applications that I don't even, sometimes I'm not sure what system I'm supposed to use, particularly on the borders, because I'm not always sure which road is in which part. So it's a clear desire to move to MasterGov. I think the problem we've had is that the data quality hasn't been as good as was initially anticipated. So data cleansing has taken a lot longer, but now it's been moved to Transformation Board. There's going to be a clear checkpoint and they're going to look at all that resources that are needed to take it to implementation. So that's why we are saying we're expecting that to be implemented with a go live date in summer, autumn of this year. That therefore means there'll be a single public access point on the website. People will be able to put in an address, they'll be able to put in an application reference. There should be able to be better case histories because I noticed some systems provide a case history, some of them don't. So that should make life a lot easier for members of the public and agents to be able to understand on particular planning applications. And hopefully, my understanding as well is that MasterGov will enable map searches because often people can see things better spatially. And that's particularly an issue where you might have a corner property and it's not always sure which address is given because it's, as I say, sitting on that corner. And the map searches are invaluable, I've always found, for members of the public to be able to look at particular applications.
Councillor Earls, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add around that communication element and how residents will access planning services in future. What I'm really excited about is the digital capabilities and the AI, things like having a mapping system, but then also how we can expand that to make that so much easier for residents to use. So, for example, having an email notification if there's a planning application in your road next door, actually bringing it up to the 21st century so that we have a functioning planning digital platform to be able to actually put in our applications and to be able to challenge applications, put in our representations and use, and especially using a map system. I think that'd be really good. I'm certainly one who's always on Google Maps looking at different applications, but it will make life a little bit easier. So I'm really excited about that, and hopefully when we're back we can talk about that a little bit further.
Councillor Northover.
I just, even though I'm critical of what is there at the moment, one good thing is that you can actually look back maybe 20 years at historical applications. Is that will that data come across, or would that still be something you can look at?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. My understanding is that is the intention is that there is a pure data migration. So all the records that are already there should be moved over. As I've only been with BCP since the 1st of December, I'm not sure if that is fully comprehensive, and whether or not there might be microfiche records, etc., that need to be filled in. But obviously we will find out. But yeah, my understanding, if there's data now, it would just be claims, make sure it's all the geo referencing is correct, because I say if it's going to have a map, it needs to be correct, and that's taking a lot longer.
Thank you. Got next, Councillor Harriott.
Sorry, does the new system allow kind of better cross-department working? For example, how planning interacts with licensing, both premises licensing and kind of housing HMO licensing. There's issues at the minute where they don't quite align up, and people are sometimes granted premises licenses for things they don't have planning for, and HMO situations as well.
I'm not sure exactly how the internal arrangements will work, but I do just need to make the point that there is a real issue between how the different regimes work together. And obviously licensing has its licensing objectives that it needs to work down. They are not the same as planning. So it is quite feasible that you can have something that has licensing, has a license, but doesn't have planning permission, and vice versa. And we recognise that doesn't seem very logical when they're both given by the council, but the planning system is set up so that it can't intercede on areas where there's other legislation that comes in. And that's a similar issue, obviously, where you have that movement between the planning system and, for example, building control. That's actually been smoothed slightly as a result of Grenfell, and they've got that better link now with Gateway 1 and the fire issues. But it's an issue also we have with the links between the way housing works, and as you've highlighted, HMOs is an area where if I had control over rewriting the way the planning system worked, I would be clearer on that separation between when it becomes a sewer generous use of being a HMO of that scale, and then how that works with also with when licensing kicks in, because I understand it's quite confusing at the moment, again, why you can allow something to just transfer in planning terms, but there still needs to be a license. The planning, the system isn't going to assist for that, because it's the difficulties in the way, when I say planning system, I mean the global planning system works, because the way legislation is set up. But the government does look at that on a regular basis, obviously. It has particularly looked at issues around short-term lets, and it's looking at potentially bringing in registration for short-term lets, and also bringing in a use class specific for short-term lets. So that's what I'm saying. The planning system is forever changing. Obviously, our systems need to change to address that.
Yeah, I think I've probably maybe not explained my question very well. It's how we use it to make sure that we're kind of boxing stuff off, as much as how the legal entity kind of works in and how other departments can interact with the system, and whether there's any kind of potential there. I think I maybe didn't expect a full answer. I suppose it's kind of, maybe hopeful rather than anything else.
If the system is more transparent and works easier, it will make referencing a lot easier, because all you would need to be sending a link out that has a link to then that master gov record, etc. So in that aspect, it should be more transparent, but you still have the separation between the regimes.
Thank you. I can't see any more hands at the moment. Okay. It's all right, Councillor Martin, go for it.
Apologies, but thanks, Chair. Just going back to the staffing issues, just wondering, is the agency staff there to address the backlog solely, or is it to address for presumably 25% that you're short on? So, i.e., would you try and continue with 75% if you weren't trying to address the backlog? So how does it feed into each other?
Thanks, Chair. So the ideal situation is that we get to no use of agency staff. That's what we're moving towards. as a result of the recent formalisation. So when I joined on the 1st of December, there was an interim structure. So there was a number of people acting up into some roles. There was a number of vacancies. And so what was done in December was to ask people whether or not they were going to permanently apply for those roles, to ask people to prove that they maybe were a senior. And so then they were applying for that job to be moved in. As a result of that, a number of agency members of staff have been allowed to go, or they're going, because we now have a permanent member of staff. So that's a kind of internal reappointment. Obviously, that's then left some vacancies. So as Jess highlighted earlier, our desire is for some of those vacancies to be made available to internal candidates to see if maybe they don't have a planning background, but they have all the skills that would enable them to move into that post. And then obviously that will fill some gaps. And then we're intending to go out and try to fill some of those external vacancies. I would be misleading inadvertently if I told this committee that I'm 100% confident that if we went out, we would get full appointments, because particularly the more senior posts that are dealing with complex majors, they are so greatly under demand. They are very selective where they work. And so we have a number of agency staff that are working in that majors team, but because we have planning performance agreements, generally their costs are covered. So we have a spread. We have agency staff working on majors, we have some agency staff working on backlog, and we also have some agency staff working on just general caseload. But the desire in particular is to move away from agency staff on standard cases, and as we're eating away in that backlog, reduce that. And in due course, if we can assist and train up more of our seniors and get external seniors to deal with those majors, we will. But the majors are really important. We need to make sure that those are still done in a timely fashion. And the brief engagement I've had with a number of big kind of external applicants recently has been they very much value that majors team and how focused they are on those good discussions that they're having to be able to get those applications forward. So it would be we'd need to have surety that if we were going to replace them, the quality of the candidate was there to ensure we're still getting those majors done in a timely fashion, because obviously they're the big scale developments that make a big difference to the economic vitality of the area.
So it's also just looking, Chair, to make sure then that there wouldn't be, in a sense of within budgets, removal of agency staff then to put more pressure on the people who are currently working there within the team. So if we sort of, I mean, I don't know where this all sits. Like obviously we're talking about people from other departments being redeployed potentially into planning. So does the team sit at the same level going forward in terms of the reorganisation? Have you lost people there? I mean, so essentially, I'm just wondering if there's like if in time there can be like, we can say, oh, we can withdraw some of the agency staff, and then you would be slightly light again, and then you end up starting to build a backlog again. I mean, can we just keep going through that cycle, especially in line with the budgetary concerns?
There will be really careful discussions with the heads of the Development Management Service about the way that we can balance that need to reduce agency staff and the pressure they cause on the council's budget, at the same time not to cause a detriment to the quality that we've been telling you that we're doing on backlog. And that's going to be a really fine balance to do. The only reassurance I suppose I can give you is that I have been managed a service what we were in a very similar circumstances to this as we are now. It took a number of years, but by the time I left, we had no backlog, no agency staff at all. And my staff had caseloads that were reasonable, and I wasn't having any staff leaving other than for opportunities for promotions elsewhere or changes. So it was a stable, happy department, but that takes time, and that takes a lot of will from the council around recognising the challenges that there are in the nature of the cases. And I feel that that baseline and that understanding is here. And so that's part of the reason I was interested in coming to work here, is that it's a challenge, but I feel all those preconditions are there to assist and that recognition that you've just said to me around change, improvement is positive, but you also have to have the staff with you understanding their value and not over pressuring them. And I think that's really, really valuable and very much welcomed.
Consent. With the backlogs, sort of moving tangentially from that a little bit, looking at the graph which has been provided on page 15 of the report, which shows the total applications alongside the backlog and the numbers which there are. Obviously, you can see the two graphs of the backlog very much following the same sort of track as the total. So you can kind of take the impression that while it's fallen off slightly, that it is impacted by the number of applications which are coming in. So moving forward from here, what sort of timeline would we be looking at to reduce the backlog down to zero or as close to zero as we could get it to?
That's a really mean question. I haven't tried to stack that yet. I mean, there, as I say, there are a range of things that are changing. So we have a new planning guarantee that's come in. That means that if planning applications haven't been determined within 16 weeks and extension of time hasn't been agreed, then potentially we'd be expected to pay the money back. That's going to change some of our prioritisation, obviously, because that will affect, again, the council's budget. You don't want lots of money going out the door if officers are still having to do those same scales of work. So I need to phase all of that in. But as I say, the desire is to take the opportunities with us to get those done in a timely fashion. I don't want to commit to a time frame. Maybe that's why I'll make a note for that for the next kind of planning improvement update. I try to give you a timeline for when we can get to that baseline situation of nil backlog.
Thank you. It wouldn't be a good scrutiny session without some mean questions, though, would it? So we've got to try and put a few in place. Is there anyone else on the committee who's got anything? No? I'll continue then, possibly with some other slightly mean questions. In paragraph 24, there's a table with the council performance, which has shown the performance levels with the red, amber, green rating. And there's one which sticks out, which is the red one, which is below the government targets of 70%, which is for minor projects in pool. I was just wondering if you had any insight as to why that particular part of the graph is so much below where everywhere else is.
It's not an unusual problem, in all fairness. So minors include applications that will be, say, for 1 to 9 houses, and that still classes as a minor. So the expectation is that that could be determined within 8 weeks. If you have ever been involved with an application for 9 houses, in many ways that's no difference to dealing with an application for 10 houses, depending on the location. BCP is a very tight, much of BCP is a very tight urban area. There's lots of constraints. They're quite complicated applications to deal with. And so generally that's why they take a little bit longer. The actual stats that's monitored nationally, a couple of years ago, they merged minors and others. And so actually you only designated if your minors and others are 70%, under 70%. And so they're actually been really fair by reporting to you them separately, whereas actually the data is kind of does cover it a little bit more. But yeah, as I say, it's a common picture. I'm not quite sure why exactly in pool, but the figures obviously are quite low in Christchurch, or lowering a kind of lowish in Christchurch as well. So as I say, minors is an issue because of that complexity of applications, which are actually still quite complicated, only being given 8 weeks to determine.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like nothing to be too concerned about. It's just the nature of what is classed as a minor. And that may also answer the next question, which I was going to lead on to it, which is in paragraph 34, which is the live complaints, which again, the stage 1 complaints is significantly higher in Poole, with 11 complaints, 2 in Christchurch, none in Bournemouth. So is that in line with those minors in it? The planning application's not being processed in time, or is it something else?
This is a difficult question to answer because I don't want to be disclosive. There has been some issues in Poole in relation to staffing, some particular staffing issues there, whereby capacity was lost. No reasons other than just it's a matter of fact. Obviously, because of that reduced capacity, that meant application process wasn't able to go as quickly, particularly through sign off. And obviously, if you're not getting applications signed off as quickly as you would like, obviously you get more complaints. So it's that there is an identified issue why, and it's not a negative. It's just life. There was particular issues to say that impacted on sign off ability.
Okay. Just without pushing too hard on it, I'm assuming that there's something at hand to address that and the staffing issues that you've mentioned being the case, and that in the future ones that'll likely drop off.
It is a short-term staffing issue that couldn't be planned for and couldn't be dealt with in any other way. The only thing I would say is if we had MasterGov at that point in time, whereby there was an easier ability for team leaders to be able to work across the system because they had open access, that would have just added a little bit. They could have filled that gap a little bit more. But obviously, because it was related to that area, related obviously to the Poole local plan, it wasn't easy for another part of the planning unit to be able to take those cases over and assist. I think it's probably as easy as I can explain it.
Okay, thank you. Jess, did you want to come in on that as well?
I just really wanted to emphasise the excellent job the team have done and the process that's been put in place in the last 6 months to deal with planning complaints and to get absolutely on top of them, and how much they have reduced off since over the last 2 years since I've been here. I've seen a real significant drop in the data. The data shows that. It shows a significant drop in complaints. My inbox also shows that, which is always helpful because that reduces the time I'm dealing with them. But it's, really impressed by how the team have put in a really robust system, but also because they're getting on top of the backlog, that is reducing the number of plates coming through the door. So I just wanted to highlight that really good work.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Councillor Adams.
Sorry, similar question. It may well be better directed as Jess, as she's been here a bit longer, but it's great to see the drop in complaints. I wonder if I could ask the same question about the sort of journey on the reliance of agency staff. So although they were using 25% now, how's that changed over the last couple of years? Like, where do we sort of peak out, just to get a vibe of where we are now?
Yes, it has reduced. Not at the pace that I would want the agency numbers to reduce. So when I first joined the council over 2 years ago, it was really high. And that wasn't necessarily just a position within BCP, but a position nationally. Coming out of the pandemic, it was becoming more difficult to secure permanent planning staff. And still the market is really competitive in that space, but it has reduced off. And Wendy's only been here for a really short time, but she's already, getting a real grip on continuing that journey with the team to look at actually how do we make that change, trying to align it to the start of the new financial year going forward. And, recognising that when people are permanent staff, they're more likely to live locally, more likely to really be dedicated to their area and wanting to make a difference in their area. So that is improving, but the challenge now is really the market availability of qualified planners.
Brilliant, thank you. That leads me into another question that you sort of touched upon. But in terms of planning staff that live locally rather than further afield, do you know roughly what proportions live locally compared to further afield? And with agency staff specifically, I guess you're quite constrained and you've only got who's available. But what proportion of them live locally and make decisions locally rather than living further afield?
I haven't got. I don't know whether Wendy's got the data on that on her fingertips, but I don't have the exact data on that. What I do know is we've really been pushing to try and get people that are local. Now, I'm not saying that all of the agency staff are local at the moment, but we've been trying to really drive that, and driving that through a requirement for them to be in the office 1 or 2 or 3 days a week, so that they really get to know the local area and understand it. So sorry, I'm sure Wendy can go away and get that data if she doesn't have it already, and share it with you.
I don't have the data to hand, but I do know that the DM managers and the team leaders are all local. So reports might be drafted by an officer, but they are signed off obviously by a team leader. So I know that there has in the past been concern expressed by members around, are people who are making the recommendations really understand the nuances of the area? So hopefully that's reassured you that the people that actually are doing that sign off, they're the ones that really know the area, they know the applications, and they know how that works in that wider. Most of them have been with BCP for quite a long time, so I can find the information, but as I say, hopefully that will reassure you that actually those staff that you really need to be local, team leaders and DM managers, they are all local.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you both for that.
Great, thank you. Is there anything else from the committee on this paper? Or anything that you'd like to add? Any Jess, Councillor Earl? No, in that case, thank you very much for coming. Wendy, I know it's a bit of a baptism of fire with you not even being in post for 2 months yet, so it's really appreciated how much you've been able to answer on this paper, and we look forward to seeing you here again for hopefully more good news. Thank you very much. Okay, so that brings us on to item number 6, 7. It's been a long day. This is the report on school streets, and I think Richard Pincroft, you're going to be introducing that, and Councillor Earl as well. In lieu of Councillor Hadley, I think, in this case, right?
Well, this is an interesting one because school streets crosses over so many different areas, doesn't it? You know, children, road safety, environment, air pollution, that kind of thing. So it's actually got my name and it's got Councillor Hadley's name on. I'm here presenting it in my capacity as road safety lead on Cabinet. So again, we've got some fantastic officers here who are very in tune with this and have been running it for the last 2 years. But I was just going to give a little bit of an explanation from a Cabinet perspective as to what's in the paper. So obviously over the last 2 years, we've put in school streets, which I'll just explain briefly what they are in case anyone hasn't come across them yet. It's a way in which we can manage traffic around schools and try and make them safer places, cleaner places for children and young people as they're going into school and coming out. They're usually regulated by volunteers or by teachers. They operate on a timing basis, so they're not in place for 24 hours a day. They're usually sort of in the morning when school starts, and then again at kick out time. And what I'm really excited about, and why I'm really glad to be presenting this, is because of the really positive feedback that we've got from this. In fact, I think 85% of those who have experienced a school street in their area, they have been keen to keep them. We also know 11.5% of children now travel actively to school, whereas before they didn't. And part of the success of this is the engagement that the team have done with not just families and parents and schools, but also with wider neighbourhoods and residents. And it's that real sense of bringing a community along with you, which has made this so successful. We do use ETROs, which are experimental traffic regulation orders, a bit controversial in other contexts, but in this context, it gives us the real flexibility to be able to change projects, make amendments, be adaptive based on the consultation results, and so on. So just from my point of view as road safety lead, the school streets that we've got, which are 6 currently in place at various stages in their journey, we've got 59% of children feeling safer, 80% of carers feeling safer. I just wanted as well to touch, I'm sure you've read the appendix, there's lots and lots of information there about how great these are, but I did just want to mention about the future as well, and the learning that we have now within our transport team, within the road safety team, within the active travel and with school streets. You know, we have so much learning in this council that we're in a position where this is scalable, and we can start looking at other schools where we could potentially do this. We do have some capital funding to carry on this work, and also an allocation for LTP, which is the local transport plan, which can continue seeing this build and improve and start in other areas too. So just to give my endorsement as a cabinet member, this work is, you know, it started really, really well, and it's just a case of keeping it going and making sure that every school can eventually benefit from a really safe environment outside. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Earl. Richard, do you or any of your team want to add anything at this stage?
To be honest with you, now I think Councillor Earl's covered pretty much my entire sheet, which I've just ticked off as she went through. Thank you. No problem.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll hand over to Councillor Herrick to start this, as he asked for this to come on our agenda. So, Councillor Herrick.
So yeah, obviously I asked because actually it was something that I think was a great success, and I kind of made some notes of statistics that I was kind of going to talk about, but Councillor Earl has kind of covered most of them. But you know, more children arriving at school actively, I think is a great success. Every head that I've spoken to can see a difference in children when they arrive, like on foot or on wheels. You know, 92% of parents kind of saying that they love it. 72% of children. I'd love to see what the gap is there and whether kids just don't like the rain. And yeah, and looking for continuation of it. So, and both the heads with kind of roads outside in Wallasdown and Winton West are kind of like just, you know, oh my God, can we have one? Which is really great to hear. So I suppose I have obviously got some questions like how scalable, how quickly, and what are the constraints around that, and what will hold us back, I think, is the thing. And I think we all know the answer to that, but I'd just like to probably put it on public record. And I suppose, obviously, from residents in the streets, I think maybe a bit of reassurance for them, like how do their perceptions change over time? Because I think, as with a lot of traffic things, the initial response is often one of kind of like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do something. And then actually the reality is kind of that it's actually much easier to do. So thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Earl, do you want to pick up that to start?
Yeah, of course, and I'm really lucky in this sense in that I can talk about it from being the ward councillor, because we've got one in our ward, which is Livingston Road, and I've been really impressed with the engagement with those areas, with the individuals and the households who live around the school, and how much they've been involved and listening to what's actually being done. Because I know what you mean. We do tend to have a tendency with people getting very anxious around changes to road layout, but because of the nature of the consultation, and because of the constant communication and the way that residents are really listened to in this, it comes out in that we have something that everyone can agree on. And I was quite surprised because with my residents, as soon as you explain to them what's going on, or you show them the plans, or you talk about the benefits, they're actually really on board. I don't think anyone can disagree with safer, you know, safer roads outside of schools. I think it's just residents need to have that space to be able to have their queries answered, and their concerns listened to. In terms of scalability, you're right, it will be absolutely contingent on the thing that holds us back in everything we want to do, which is our funding situation. Obviously, I'm sure Richard can talk a little bit more about where our funding comes from this, a bit from government as well. But yes, it will depend on what we can do. And I think it's brilliant now that schools are saying they're interested, they want to get involved, they want this for their area because they've seen these results. And if we can just carry on as quickly as we can within our funding constraints, then there's no reason why any school can't have this outside their front school gates. Thanks.
I hope so. If you want to just come in about the funding, that's absolutely fine, and sort of how and when. Well, we've managed to, obviously, as you can see in the report, the first Sustrans detachment managed to achieve 4 school streets in a single year. Based on our current resource and capacity, that's effectively the sort of level that we think we could potentially roll out into future years. But it is mainly dependent on the sort of revenue support that we get externally. So we've been very successful with bids to Active Travel England, and very recently we secured an extra £143,500, which we've used to fund Sustrans bike kit officers in the schools. And that's part of the key ingredient, really. Those officers can go along and actually prime the school streets, almost help teach volunteers that are going to staff the barriers, if you like, at the start and finish of the day. So that's just an insight into that. I would say we've also been really successful with capital grant as well. So we've had the Active Travel Fund 4 grant, which I believe has just been through Cabinet, and we've gone to council for full approval. And as part of that, we had a £400,000 allocation towards school streets that we were successful for. So that's the capital element. So there's 2 parts to this. One is getting the revenue in to actually fund the activity in the first place. Actually get the school streets established and do the activities in the school to encourage the change in the travel behaviour. So there's lots of excellent work. I've got Emily Cooper and Amanda Shorey here to my right, who are really engaged with the Sustrans officers, and they ensure that there are lots of things like air quality challenges and scoop to Lapland and etc. All these things that are going on in schools in the lead up to Christmas, etc. to try and encourage that change. So lots and lots we can do there. In terms of the sort of prioritisation, I guess, is a bit of an element of that, because you mentioned that there's obviously schools that want to achieve that. Beth Barkerstock, unfortunately, apologies tonight, she's very ill, and she would have actually been leading on this presentation tonight, so I'm kind of standing in for her. She's worked with her team and developed proposed criteria for ranking potential school streets, which you would expect to include things like, if you were to put a school street, the number of sort of journeys that would be influenced, the sort of, the actual conditions in and around the school that are currently in place. So we're going to bring that forward as a sort of policy within the unit soon in terms of ranking. So we can obviously update interested councillors on that in due course. In regard to the perceptions over time, I think again it's really in those appendices. If you look in those appendices, you can see the quotes from members of the public. They are genuine. They're not people that we've just asked to comment. They are genuine people that are sceptical. So it's really, really pleasing to see that. And what I would say is, Councillor Earl kindly referred to the experimental traffic regulation order process. It is a really valuable tool that in our a sort of tool that we can use in this instance, because it offers such flexibility. What we're doing is we're effectively closing the roads during those times. We can adjust those times if we want to within an 18-month period. What we have been doing in sort of the way we've been rolling it out to date is basically enabling those ETROs to go into place and then monitoring them for 6 months and doing the engagement over a 6-month period. At the end of that 6 month, if there are localized issues, we can make amendments again. And there's been real sort of cross departmental working within the operations directorate, Jess's directorate, in so much as, we're engaging with colleagues in parking, and then the traffic sections, etc., to make sure that if there are local issues, we can overcome them. I think that was it, really, to be honest with you. Yeah, that's a summary.
Do you want to follow up on that?
I suppose actually I did have one note, and I could ask about 30 questions on this, so I will let someone else have a go in a moment. Will the catchment areas of school be obviously included in that kind of a ranking of where they go? Because obviously some schools have much wider catchments than others, and obviously the kind of almost the demand on driving is probably quite significantly different from a school that say has a catchment of a mile versus one that has say 3 or 4.
Yes, it would, of course, and obviously there's all different drivers, faith schools, all kinds of different elements that drive who goes where. In primary schools, obviously, you have more of a local catchment generally, and obviously with the secondaries, it's far more challenging as people commute across the areas that will be sort of taken into consideration.
Councillor Adams.
It's a bit of a comment, bit of a question, so you might have to pick out the fun bits. I'm reading through the report. I thought it was a really, really well put together report. I did really like it. And I think with these sorts of measures, I think they're some of probably the least controversial. I think they're quite an easy sell in certain places. And Millie mentioned the wider benefit to residents, and this is something I don't know if it's more of an observation or a question that I wanted to sort of mention. Like going forward, I think it'd be quite helpful if in the consultations or whatever you do as a follow-up, it'd be quite helpful to have a separate thing for sort of people who live in the area who don't have kids using the schools, because the amount of times I hear about the schools in Kinston where it's a nightmare getting out if you drive because cars are parked all over the shop. I think it's a measure, a targeted measure like this outside of a school is could actually be really popular in sort of wider communities. And I also wanted to ask about sort of by closing off part of a road, what's the impact on the wider sort of circumference? So if you close a bit of it, does it move the parking problem along, or where the radius is wider, does that dissipate quite drastically? And if so, sorry, I'm coming to a point, but if so, would you consider further measures sort of slightly further afield to maybe dissipate the problem further, or not? Basically, go for it.
Councillor Earl?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. It's actually one I discussed with the team around that sort of displacement, because we were imagining, well, if you put this sort of slight radius around the entrance to the school, everyone's just going to go that little bit further away. But actually, what we found is that that doesn't happen, and the data supports that actually it does create that modal shift. So people are thinking less around how can they park as close to school as they can, and more around how can they get to school in a better way that's healthier and doesn't require them to drive right up to the school gates. I think there might be some more information on that from you guys, but I don't mind if you've got it.
Yes, we have found with the schools that we've been working with so far that there was certainly concern from residents before the school streets went in, and at that point we had lots of queries coming in saying, what about our road? This is suddenly going to be overrun, where it's already busy during school times. But we have found that as the school street's been introduced, the situation has rarely ended up being the concerns that they had at the time. But also we've then been able to introduce other measures. So for example, in one of our schools where there were concerns in one of the roads, we've worked with the parking team to set up a parking permit in a local car park, which has then enabled the parents to park there for free for a short period of time as a trial, and walk in that last few minutes into school, and that has then stopped the complaints within that area, both from coming into ourselves and into parking. So that's actually been very successful.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Adams?
Yeah, the only other bit that I sort of mentioned, I know I go on a bit, is just that going forward, I just think it would be just something to note. I think it'd be interesting to have a separate bit about the feedback from the residents in the area, primarily for when you go out to sell it to other people. I think it's a really good idea, and it's one that's not controversial at all when you look at the results compared to others.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good suggestion, and one we can certainly take away and make sure that it's covered off. What I would say is, because these are experimental traffic regulation orders, before they get made permanent, there are public consultations on the there's an actual legal order process that we follow, so we do take all that feedback into consideration, and the actual final decision to sort of make the school street permanent is taken through cabinet at the moment, and perhaps potentially through different delegations into the future that are in the pipeline, but it is all covered in the round. But I do take your point and think it's a very valid point around actually surveying the impact on those residents that aren't persons that are using the school or benefiting from the school opening.
So I'm not saying it's a negative. I do think it's a positive impact, if you know what I mean, but people wouldn't necessarily recognise it until you show them the date.
Almost using it as a sales job on the future schools and streets around there, yeah. Councillor Northover.
Thank you. I don't know who I'm aiming at. I live very near to one of these, and outside of the zone, and there hasn't been any sort of build up of cars or anything like that, as you might have thought. So that is interesting. I kind of think that it should just be an obvious thing that all children should be able to get to school without, having to have cars sort of going really near to them. But so just one thing that maybe I'm critical of, I suppose, is that there has to be so much, like the school has to be behind it. We have to have volunteers, that we have to have barriers and somebody manning them. It just seems to me that why can't car drivers just behave themselves, and why can't there just be a sign that says you can't park, you can't, this is school. I sort of feel like we're pandering to people, and I suppose my fear is that stops us rolling it out as quick, because we feel we've got to train people up and get these things. And do we actually have to? Is this just something we've done this time just to sort of do a best practice thing? Are we going to have to do it like this all the time? Because some schools might not have the parents that are willing to do this, and should they miss out, yeah, that's my question.
I think what we've certainly found, this is an ongoing thing, and we've been learning a lot as we go along. But one of the biggest things has to be the engagement with the school. It's one of the things we've looked at with our criteria, because it's the school who've got to work with their parents as well to change the behaviour, as well as being able to man that barrier. And yes, that is tricky for some of the schools, and it is something that might mean that some of the schools aren't going to be ready straight away, whereas others are ready more quickly. But we are also working as an ongoing thing to try and encourage parents to change their behaviour. And in fact, Amanda has introduced just recently a parents' parking promise. Perhaps you want to just mention that.
Yeah, so the Parents Parking Promise, we're trialling in some of the Sustrans bike it schools. There are already schools that have got a level of engagement, and it's basically a scheme that's running in lots of other local authority areas, our nearest being Southampton, where parents voluntarily sign into a scheme and say, hey, I'm not going to park on the curb, and I'm not going to block that driveway, and I'm not going to leave my engine idling outside the school. And they end up with just a window sticker. And it ends up as like a self-enforcing scheme in the other areas where the parents are like, oh, they're in the parking scheme, why aren't they parking properly? So it's a bit of an accountability, and then it puts the pressure on the other parents, and it sort of highlights who's really not behaving well. Part of that parking promise is I'm only going to drive when I really have to, and if I really have got to drive, why can't I park 10 minutes away from the school or 5 minutes away from the school and park and stride as well, to try and reduce that impact right outside the school gates?
I mean, I'm just going to sort of bring us back to your main point of your question about how, obviously it's quite resource heavy at the moment involved with the schools. There are other options out there. You could, for example, the council has secured the powers for moving traffic regulation order contraventions. What that means is we could install automatic number plate recognition cameras, which could potentially find members of the public that drive down these routes at times when they're not supposed to be going down those routes. It is quite costly though, the actual capital install of the equipment, and then there's obviously ongoing revenue costs and back office costs as well. So that's something we can explore into the future, definitely. But at the moment, we're not in a position as an authority to drive that forward. We're due to install some cameras at some stage later this calendar year. And we'll, following that trial, we can have a look at that. That's not related to actual school streets at the moment. That is a potential for the future.
Are you happy with that response?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I sort of build on it a little bit, I guess, from that point, and ask, are we being ambitious enough with the school streets? I'm going to use St Clements and St John's as an example, because I used to live on St Clements Gardens, where that school is, and I saw the traffic every single day when I was living there and what it's like. And where the road is being shut off to access St Clements Gardens, where the school gate is, it's providing you can see from the photographs in the report how much clearer it is of cars walking down there, parents pushing buggies in the street, making it so much easier for them to get down. But it's the last 100 meters into the school. is there scope that we could push this circle of impact out even further from the schools to create more active travel, make it a little bit safer? Because I think where you say there's lesser impact on people because they're not parking dangerously or so what, there is still people coming and driving to schools. We know that's the case because the need to supply the parking permits for the car park for one of them and things like this. Is there an additional resources we could put in place to create a better, wider circle, to create more active journeys into the school, to create cleaner air in a bigger area around that? Or am I trying to be like, perfection is the enemy of success, really? And actually, we should be focusing on trying to recreate these smaller ones more and more and more and push them out quicker rather than trying to perfect and create a really good example of it. I don't know which of you'd like to pick that up.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. And I would agree cautiously in that, you know, the school street that we have in our area, when I first saw the plans, I was quite surprised that it was just one road that was included in it rather than a much larger area. But that was very early. That was one of the first ones in place. And I think the learning's there now on how we actually go ahead with doing more to make the most out of the school street. So maybe that's a bit of a challenge to us as ward councillors to, you know, when we are presented with school streets in our area, to make sure that we're being as ambitious as possible and pushing it as far as we can. But I'm sure there are lots of constraints that I'm not aware of. So go ahead, guys.
I was just going to say one thing, as we're able to scale this up and introduce more school streets, I would hope that we would then also have the connection between the different roads around, and that would then spread out. So hopefully that would then increase the amount of roads where people are parking sensibly, where people are moving a bit, where people are walking from further away into the school. But I think that is then part of the whole, we need more school streets in order to encourage better awareness, better parent parking.
Nice to kind of linking them together into a bigger scheme. Thank you very much. Councillor Martin, I've got your name on the list. Did you indicate?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just going back to traffic displacement, because you've said you'll make notes about going forward with doing surveys around the streets, how that might have an impact in terms of poor parking on the streets around. Just speaking anecdotally, I've got a school that's in a scheme ward, not in my ward, but ward adjacent, and I have seen like some interesting behaviour, which in terms of dropping children off as close to the school street as possible. So obviously that might go unreported because essentially it happens, and as long as nothing bad happens, it's done within, you know, a few seconds kind of thing. So I'm just surprised that the displacement only gets like a paragraph in the appendix, really, and then it links to, it says that school streets leads to an overall drop in traffic volume and displaces to some degree to surrounding streets. This does not create road safety risks that cannot be adequately mitigated. Then it links to another paper where it sort of just makes reference to a tiny bit of monitoring around a couple of schools in Birmingham. So I was just wondering if, as well as looking at surveying people who might have an impact with drives being covered and all the rest of it, whether there'd be actually some kind of monitoring where it's reasonable, where there might be main roads, because I know each school will obviously have a different, you know, the road layout around it will be, you know, each one will have its own unique issues, but it'd just be good if there was some sort of monitoring where people are like, someone just taking a look, that's dangerous behaviour that's happening here, and therefore it can say, because it's even when you read that other report, it's not clear what the adequate mitigation is for those safety risks, and I don't know if you know sort of what that might be, but it'd just be good that maybe that's looked into a little bit more detail, not because the school street itself is fundamentally flawed, because those people probably engage in that behaviour outside of schools, but it's just like, where it's necessary, how can that be looked at, and what are those adequate mitigations, because I can't sort of see what that would be. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, in terms of road safety, we generally look at sort of trends over time, because there can be, you know, when we're doing any sort of reporting, for example, I'm sure many councillors in the room and, you know, others in the past are aware that whenever they've requested anything because they think there's a road safety risk in a road, there generally needs to be an accident cluster nearby before the sort of team, dare I say it. There you go. I've got a councillor in the background agreeing already. You know, so what I'm suggesting is we definitely are looking at the roads around these school streets and monitoring them. We're looking at the accident data in the surrounding streets, and really what we need to be able to do is do that in a sort of over a 3-year period to identify if there's any real trends. Like most things in life, generally if there is a problem, people are very quick to write into us and tell us that there's a problem, and we are looking into those problems when we receive them in regard to the school streets, just to assure you that is going on. If somebody says to us, your school street is creating an issue here, we do go out and look at it and ensure that we're, you know, not creating anything that's hazardous. And obviously the data over time will tell us if you know, if there's statistically anything different in an area, and whether we need to go in and put some sort of different intervention in, whether it be, you know, some sort of you know, change to the traffic regulation orders to adjust parking to increase visibility, or, you know, any sort of, you know, physical measure to reduce speed if it, you know, if that was a factor in the issue. So we're very much aware of that, and it's a good point that you've raised. And actually, probably in hindsight, should have been covered in the main report. So thank you for flagging.
You happy with that response? Cool. Next on the list is Councillor Ricketts.
Thank you. I really think this is such a good scheme. We used to do, when I lived in Weymouth many years ago, something very similar there when my children were little, and it was so appreciated by the children, by the residents around the school. I really do think these are good schemes, and I've actually seen it in action in Folkestone as well. I'm just wondering, have you been approached by any schools in Christchurch? Because obviously you've trialled it in Bournemouth and you've tried it in Poole. We've not had a trial in Christchurch. Just wondered if you'd been approached by any, because I can certainly think of some that would definitely benefit from this. And if you have, would they be likely to be rolled out in the next phase?
Councillor Earl, is that for you maybe?
Like we talked about a moment ago, looking at the criterion ranking and how we could look into making sure that we've got the right ingredients there, I think, to make it happen, you know, volunteers, school on board, families. I think we need to make it as equitable as possible, and factor into that, looking at making sure we have like a spread across all of our areas. I don't yet know the information on what's coming down the pipeline, but now is the opportunity to sort of be talking to our schools and making sure that they are looking at this and asking to be considered next, because, you know, we're going to carry it on. It's just a matter of time, but I think it's all about getting them on that ranking and making sure that they have everything that's needed ready to go for when we've got the funding to do it.
Come back on that. Thank you. So is it appropriate, do you think, for ward councillors to approach the schools, or should that really come from our officers?
So we have been approached, just to clarify your original question, we have been approached by some schools in Christchurch, and we obviously, these pilots have been successful. We've, you know, with very short deadlines, had to bid for future funding, you know, Active Travel England, you know, hopefully if they're listening to this, I'm not trying to criticise them, but there've been some very short windows for us applying for funding, as in, you can apply for this grant, but we need your submission by a very short deadline. So to date, the schools that have been selected have largely been because they've had all those sorts of correct ingredients and they've already been in contact with the team. I think it's fair to say. What we are understanding now that they're, you know, becoming successful and being made permanent, we recognise that there's a need to actually get a formalised ranking system so that it's fair and equitable across, more fair and equitable across BCP. So what I would say is we will, you know, we've got we've had schools contact us. We're aware of those schools that are interested, and we're looking more about the data around the schools at the moment and coming up with a methodology for ranking them. If and when we, have got the money secured in the approvals from the local transport plan capital programme for 24-25, that's due to go through Cabinet and Council in March and onwards. Once that's approved, then when we can look at, we'll have an approved programme in terms of the funding's approved. Then we can, contact and make contact, and part of the process for implementing the school is definitely ward councillor engagement. Sorry, I'm not really answering your question fully, I don't think.
No, you really did. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Ricketts. We've got one of the committee members who isn't here today, Councillor Rice, and she sent me a couple of statements, and I've been trying to work out where to slot them in. And I think part of it sort of fits now. So it's just on regards to the point of schools and potential self-select in the future. And it's to consider asking the head teachers of the pilot primary schools to speak about it at the head teachers forums, so that they can pass on their experience to the other head teachers around the area. And also, if future funding becomes available, can we consider purchasing large wheel scooters that parents can borrow for a period of time, like a week or so, to trial parking further away from the school and then scooting in with their children. So that was just a statement from Councillor Rice. I don't think you'd need to come back on it particularly unless you want to. Yeah, please.
All I would say is, in terms of the purchasing of scooters for sort of parents to use, and that I would probably, it's something that obviously it could be feasible, but I mean, I wouldn't probably want to purchase scooters. We'd probably work with our partner Beryl and actually see if there's a way that we can encourage more, cycle usage and lever in something through that partnership potentially, because obviously there's scooters and there's bikes, rather than purchasing them.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah. Next, I've got Councillor Dalton Gibson.
Thank you. Three things, really. The first one, sort of just thinking back to the Christchurch question a minute ago, how do we prioritise? If we could do 5 schools because they're ready to roll, or 4 schools because we want to target across the area, which do you think we should do? Should we go for the greater number of schools and therefore protect a greater number of pupils, or should we worry about the geographical area? That's the first one. Do you want to deal with that one first, or do you want to give me all 3 in one go?
Yeah, I think, with any financial budget, when it comes to public spending, we need to make sure that it's going to have the most good. What I don't want to do is exclude Christchurch, so that they can't see the benefits of school streets. And I would argue that there is probably a very appropriate school in Christchurch that could be used as an example of that. So even though I think we need to target on making sure that it has that our public money goes as far as it possibly can in terms of road safety, air pollution, and everything else, there's no reason to exclude looking at Christchurch and making sure that those schools in Christchurch are also aware of what's on offer, because it's a really big opportunity for them as well.
Yes, I wasn't intending that Christchurch be excluded. All 5 schools might be in Christchurch. It might be that Bournemouth. The point is only a question of, do you try and do it what appears equitably, or do you say, well, actually, where can we get the most bang for our buck? Which to me would seem to be the obvious one. The second point, sort of related to that, is do we have an issue, and do we have a strategy around what I'll call schools that don't engage? In other words, we're looking at the ones where the headmaster wants to be involved, and et cetera, et cetera. Do we have a strategy about those who maybe they're more reticent to engage? I'm not saying they can't. Would be my last question. There are schools where clearly it's not feasible to close the road outside. It just happens to be on a busy road. So do we have alternative strategies to work with those?
Yes, we do have measures to start working with engaging with the schools before we get to the point of the school street. What we would normally do is my colleague who deals with school travel planning would go in and work with the school at developing their school travel plan, which she can explain a little bit more about if you would like. We would also start engaging with them with other active travel measures such as bikeability cycle training, steps road safety training, living streets, walk to school. We've put in place these different measures so that they're not they're something that we can work alongside with the school, bring people into to help the school, and once they can see that these measures are then benefiting them, then many of the schools are then ready to then make the commitment to moving to a school street. So but one of the things we have found particularly is with doing their travel plan, it can identify some of the issues, including other problems around how far the parents are driving. I don't know if you've got anything more you want to add on that, Amanda.
Yeah, I can certainly add in. Yeah, part of the travel planning process is to survey the pupils, the parents, and the school staff. And from that, then we can create postcode mode of travel data, so we can see exactly where people are travelling from. If there's a particular busy road that is then stopping them actively travelling, then again we can take that to safe routes to school and look at that. It might be that parents are having to drive. It will come through the surveys that parents are having to drive because they've got two school drop-offs at sort of an infants and a juniors, and then they've got almost identical times. So then that's when we're through the travel planning process, prior to any school street conversations, have conversations with those schools about, oh, can you just move your arrival time back by 10 minutes, because we've had so many parents come back and say they would love to be able to get between these schools. There's a quarter of a mile, but they physically can't do it in the time available. So a lot of that engagement and the early conversations do come from the travel planning stage.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Did you have a third question? I think you kind of alluded to it.
Really, the third one is the strategy around schools that are just not suitable school streets. If they're on a busy road, there's no way you're going to close the road outside the school. I'm not sure whether your last answer was intended to address that point as well.
It wasn't, but I think it might have done. I think, school streets have got to work for the school, but they've also got to work for the school community. And, if there is cases where a school street isn't actually the right method or the right way of encouraging active travel and increasing safety, then that's we as a sustainable travel team can work with that school to address and look at everything else. And it might be that, like with some of the schools, or one of the schools, we're doing that parking permit trial, and they're then looking at doing a walking bus from that car park to then sort of encourage children to be able to do some of their journey actively. So every school is so unique, as is the community around it. So if it's not possible to close a road right outside of school, then there might be other things that we can do to support them.
We also work quite closely with our road safety team, because there's often other road safety measures that they can then suggest and put in, which can then, or even if the road's not being closed, can make it a lot more accessible and increase active travel.
Happy with those answers? Great. I've got 3 more speakers on my list, and then I think we can probably call it on this item. So first, Councillor Herrick.
So this kind of ties into just that last kind of point, is that whilst obviously the school streets are great for kind of the last mile, which is obviously not quite the last mile, but the last few meters, is there more that we can do to encourage longer journeys to be made, so that the travel from kind of door to door is much safer and can be done independently? A lot of children do not travel to school independently because of barrier roads that exist. And I think we all know, can probably think of those in our ward that are preventing that. The other thing is probably like bikeability is obviously quite a key part of the strand that's run through this, and we've not really spoken about that. So there's 2 things: is how successful is the bikeability training in general? I'd just like to hear a bit about that. And also, does it lead on to those families that have had that bikeability training making more journeys? Have we done anything on that? I suppose we probably haven't, but I thought I'd ask anyway. Thanks.
That's probably directed at me, since I co-manage bikeability. Yes, they are. The Trust at the moment are running various schemes to assess how to review both the quality of their training and how well the pupils are engaging, and whether they're then ready to go. There are various different levels. We have For the road training, we have a level 2, which is residential training, and then a level 3, which is an advanced level, which means encourages children to be able to use all of the infrastructure and cycle all over the conurbation. And they are currently looking at, are the children able to retain the information? Are they that? Do they then feel more confident? Do the parents feel more confident? And would they be more likely to allow their children to cycle to school? And we're part of that trial. So they're in the process of collecting more data on that. So that would be something we might be able to share in the longer term. And that's something we're doing right now. But it's a growing scheme. We're constantly being asked to do more training, and we've just been securing more funding year on year to increase the amount of training we're doing.
So is bikeability kind of outside of the schools that are in West oversubscribed as well? Then are we struggling for capacity there? So I see it regularly advertised in, I think, Slade's Park, which is obviously near me, and I think Kings Park is the other centre. So do we see really good uptake from people who aren't doing it in school as well?
Yes, yes, we currently have we have a large amount of trainers and course coordinators who go into all of our schools, and we basically offer all of the schools for children over 9 are able to do as much level 2 residential road training as the school are happy to do. So we will go out and offer that to everybody, all children either living or going to school in BCP. Level 3, which is the advanced, is still growing. This is the funding for that is currently less, which is why we're also part of the trial to review that to prove to Active Travel England that this is something that they need to put more funding into.
Okay with that? Great, thank you. Councillor Northover, back to you again.
Thank you. Only because you mentioned the barrel bikes, and because I've not seen any barrel stands or boxes outside schools, is that something that could be asked, or should just be actually outside every school, really, shouldn't it? So that it becomes a normal thing that's feasible. But it's not something I've thought about, and it's not something I've noticed. So I wondered if that's something that would help.
I think that's definitely something I can take away from tonight, through the course of our conversation, and look into that. I'd be surprised if there weren't barrel bays in the vicinity of the schools, either at the ends of the streets, etc. Okay, there you go. I'm being corrected already. Look, live online. There you go. Thank you, everybody. There you go. No, but there's a pretty good spread, but definitely something we can look at, and we have quarterly partnership meetings with Beryl, so we can send that to them in advance and see if that's something we can address, and obviously get them more closely linked to the team. So this debate's been very helpful in that regard. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that'd be really interesting. And the last on the list is me, actually. So I want to just ask about something. We focused a lot on the travel and the way it is. I just want to talk about the air quality a bit, because that's mentioned in the report as well. I'm going to read it. I've got another statement from Councillor Rice, and I'll start by reading this out, and then I'll ask my question afterwards. So it just says, first of all, she'd like to thank the work done by the Sustainable Travel team and really value the work and the way it's progressing across BCP. I'd also like to see an expansion of the air pollution monitoring work and engagement work with parents on this issue. Of note, I've been able to access the Clean Air Toolkit for schools. There seems to be no link when searching the BCP website or Google. On the Clean Air Toolkit, I would like to see more info on the physiological impacts of air pollution on children. For example, that air pollution particles are so small that they pass through the placenta and deposit in the brain of a developing fetus. So I think the bit to pull out of that is really the link to the Clean Air Toolkit, and whether that can be improved to get some more, make it a bit easier, if that's possible.
I can come in on that one. I was speaking to the web team today. The website's changed over from our current website to a new website. So some of our links have been lost. Previously it was searching. It was the first thing that came up if you just Google clean airs or air pollution and stuff. So yeah, it's work in progress. In the next couple of weeks, that should be back up to full function again.
Cool, great answer. My question on it is, in paragraph 11 on the report, it says that the air quality informed by monitoring improved in 3 of the 4 schools. So the first question is, what was the issue around the 4th school that was undertaken with it? And that the air quality monitoring has limitations. I know that it's been talked about a little bit in the appendices, but if you can just talk a bit around what the limitations are and how we could improve it and what tools we've got available to bring, and also to expand that air monitoring out around the area as well, not just on the school streets, but also if there's impacts on the surrounding roads, if there's less journeys coming in, is that actually improving the air quality in the surrounding areas as well?
Well, it's really difficult challenge, isn't it? Really trying to monitor air quality across what is quite a large area, because you've almost got to predict where any traffic is displaced to. And as you can tell from the debate earlier in this evening, there's not actually seemingly that bigger, the displacement is taking across a lot of areas. So if you can imagine, we'd have to have air monitors in all these locations around all the schools. It's quite a difficult exercise to undertake. The air monitoring that's been used today have been almost what I would describe as almost sort of I've forgotten the terminology, but diffusion tubes, and they're not that accurate, being perfectly frank with you. And obviously I guess this all comes down to a much wider debate, really. I mean, we could invest a hell of a lot of time trying to track and trace and monitor air quality around these schools, or we can concentrate on trying to enable and facilitate all of them almost on the premise that we know that if we haven't got vehicles idling immediately outside of school gates and on the streets leading up to the actual school itself, then more of a common sense approach dictates that the air is going to be improved in terms of quality on those routes. So I know I'm sort of not trying to be evasive with this. It's just that it's not a simple solution to this, and if there was, then obviously we would be facilitating that. In terms of the reasons for it in the report, I think it just almost sort of refers to almost like an anomaly. It could be that the wind was in a different direction on that way. It literally can be that simple of these types of measures. It can be the geometry of the streets from previous experience, where we've had air quality management areas historically, where we've had them in Ashley Road and Station Road in Poole historically. That's the dimensions of the actual street itself, with high-sided buildings and volume of traffic, and the way that the air can't get through, as it were, or displaced. So before I talk myself into any more trouble, I'll be quick.
Thank you. No, your answer there is great. I think we all know exactly what causes air pollution and the reasons behind it and what solves it as well. So the monitoring is great to have that data, but we really need to address the root cause of it, which I really think that the School Streets programme is doing. And the wider impacts we can't see them, they are there as a benefit to everyone, and the air quality, particularly around the kids and that in the school, as well as the areas around there. Did you want to come back in?
I was going to say, I just omitted, we were successful last year with a grant to DEFRA, which has resulted in some electric vehicles being trialled along the seafront. But equally, part of that same bid, we were awarded the money to develop the Clean Air Toolkit, and we are actually in the process of purchasing a more reliable air quality monitoring toolkit at the moment. So I don't know if Amanda, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I can come in on that. We've been in conversations with Dorset Council about how they monitor their air quality, and sort of we're using them as a bit of a base, which has been really interesting to have those conversations around the bits of kit that they're using, how they're monitoring, how they're then reading that data, because they're, these are, if, when we've got this piece of kit, it will have to be in situ for quite a substantial amount of time to be able to give us some reliable pre-school street data, because it could be that everybody drives on market day and actually across the broad spectrum the air quality isn't improving so much because we're looking at a short set of data, whereas if we have like a year of data before a school street goes in, we've then got that, every Tuesday the air quality gets worse. Why is that? What's happening on the surrounding area? Has there been building works happening in the area? Has there been bonfires? Is it just that actually somebody smokes and they walk past that every single day? And without that long stretch of data, it's very difficult to then analyse the bigger picture.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I'm a big fan of data. That's why I asked the question about what it is. I think the more we've got, the better. I think that's always the case. Because I know historically this has kind of moved away from the school streets. There's been some discrepancies with, I think, the local Friends of the Earth group who done their own air monitoring, which didn't quite match up with what he had. And I think that goes a bit of a way to explain if we have something in one place for a long period of time that you can really get the details. So it's good to know that hopefully that'll be coming in the future and we'll have access to that data. I don't think I've got anyone else on the list, so I think we can draw this to a close. Thank you very much for coming. And I think from the committee, I mean, we had a pre-meeting before we have this meeting as well, and the general feeling is that this is great. We're really supportive of the School Streets programme, and I know we've gone into a lot of detail about how it can improve and what different ways we can be doing it, but the general theme is that we think it's really positive and we look forward to seeing it hopefully roll out across loads more schools, and we can come back in and talk about it when every school across BCP has got either an active travel plan or a school street there. So thank you for bringing this to us. And for us, that brings us on to the final, well, the penultimate actually, part of the meeting, which is item 8, which is the discussion, the paper on the appointment of independent co-opted members to the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And I think, Claire, are you going to introduce this for us?
Yes, Chair, thanks.
Thank you.
This paper is brought to you in response to the decision made by Council in September as part of the changes in the overview and scrutiny structure of the Council to allow the committee to consider whether it wishes to appoint 2 independent co-opted members. We made a suggestion about it at the last committee meeting, which was back in October now, which seems a while ago. And just to let you know that this paper was prepared for the December meeting. So timeframes may have been adjusted slightly because of the delay to this meeting. So that's something that can be considered. But so it's there with recommendations for you to consider whether you wish to appoint 2 independent members.
Thank you, Claire. I think everyone's read the paper, so I'm happy to open this up to the committee if anyone's got any comments on it. Councillor Doughton Gibson, I think, was first.
Yeah, can I thank you for the Chairman. I have to say I fundamentally disagree with this because at the end of the day, I would say that we are the independent people, but we have an electoral mandate. We're not the administration, we're not the officers. You know, we are a room full of people independent from a decision. That's our job to be here, but we have the electoral mandate. As per our pre-meeting discussion, I think the only merit I see in it is the ability to co-opt people to what I would call fill gaps in our demographic. I have seen Councillor Rice's email, and I'm guessing by her question about people with convictions that she's thinking of other people who have convictions around green campaigning. And I have to say, I'm not convinced we need anybody who's interested in the environmental issues any more than we've got plenty of them on the committee already. And therefore, I don't think that would add value. We did mention somebody, maybe an older teenager, for example, those people who are going to be here long after I've gone. And obviously all our decisions will have their influences. There may be other demographics. I'm not saying what the demographics are. So I think other than to fill in demographic gaps, personally, I don't think it's a good idea, but I do think it's a good idea to, if we're very careful who we choose, in order to broaden the committee rather than, shall we call it, intensify it in a particular direction. The danger being that people want people like them involved rather than looking for people who put a different challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, if you want to come back on that.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to say that one of the benefits to co-opting people onto the committee might be to bring in subject expertise to the committee, not necessarily from a particular demographic, but maybe, you know, someone who has particular knowledge around areas within the remit of the committee. One of the other things that the committee also has within its remit is housing. So the committee might want to consider whether a representative from a tenants union or something like that might add something to the committee. So I think there's a really big range of options in terms of who you might want to co-opt onto an environment and place committee, because you do have quite a wide remit. It's not just environment. There's lots of things that the committee could look at. So I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, I was just going to say, while you mentioned Councillor Rice's email, I will just read out what that is, so see if it's some context for anyone who might have missed it. There's two little bits. I'll read the whole thing in full. So it says, moving up to, I make the recommendation 3, please can the word be changed to chair instead of chairman. Please also note the presence of the BCP Poverty Truth Commission and whether any links can be made with regards to selection of new members via this facility. With regards to the eligibility requirements, there is a statement regarding no unspent criminal convictions. I'm concerned this may be overly restrictive. At present time in the UK, many citizens that would be extremely valuable on the committee may have a criminal conviction for peaceful protest, such as being involved in a march. They may be fined anything from £10, but I understand this will mean it is considered an unspent criminal conviction for up to 5 years and hence exclude them from applying. Please can this condition be reconsidered? And that's just so everyone's aware of what Councillor Rice was referred to by Councillor Dalton Gibson and Councillor Ricketts. Oh, sorry, can I interrupt?
That's okay. I just wanted to come back on Claire's comment on that. I think what you say is quite true, subject experts, but equally you have to then say, I don't know what the subject expert, well, let's use housing. I happen to know about housing, it's my day job. But let's say we recruit somebody who is a housing expert. Why have they sat through tonight's meeting? There's no housing issues on it at all. As a committee, there's nothing stopping us bringing in experts anytime we want to. We don't need to co-opt them onto the committee. They can come anyway. And so, in a sense, that's why I'm saying I don't think there's the advantage, because we do cover that wide range. We're not talking about all topics. And if we get somebody who is very narrowly focused on a topic expert, I don't think that's the right solution, because we can bring them in without needing to co-opt them. And then we can use that, I'll use the word resource, either to save the money or perhaps to bring in, as I say, people from particular groups, demographics who we feel are underrepresented, which I think actually Councillor Rice is sort of almost alluding to around the Poverty Truth Commission. Would be my understanding of it. I did, by the way, check the rehabilitation of offenders, and it's not as long as 5 years. I forget now whether it was 1 or 2, but it is shorter than is stated there because I looked it up.
Thank you. Councillor Ricketts, sorry to interrupt you there.
That's okay. As chairman of standards, I'd actually like you to encourage you to accept this, because we have 2 co-opted members, 2 independent persons on our standards committee, and they bring an invaluable contribution to our deliberations. We have informal hearing meetings, and they really do add to the meeting. They bring something that, I mean, sometimes it's very easy for us as elected members to become almost institutionalized in the BCP way, and they bring that outside element to it. They see things as members of the public. They have a perception that sometimes we might lack. I actually think this is to be encouraged. It's worked so well for us. I mean, I've been on standards for 3 years, and the people that we have there are excellent. We co-opted 2 very good people, 3 very good people through our recruitment process. And obviously that's essential to make sure that you're looking for the right caliber of people, the people that you think that can actually contribute to the committee, have experience, and that's exactly what we did with the standards process. And we're just about to go out to recruitment again, because we have to on that every 4 years. So yeah, I'll just say, don't be scared of this. This is actually very positive, and I'm very happy with the recommendations as set out.
Thank you for that, Councillor Ricketts. Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, I have to agree with everything that my colleagues said. Not that I've ever been on standards committee. It's one I've never done, but there is time, I suspect. But I have been involved in children's overview and scrutiny, and also in the adult social care. And to bring in independent people is common practice. And the most useful and helpful experience I've had is been when we've actually had young people on children's. They were part of the committee, the MYPs, and I can't speak highly enough that young people will bring a different dimension to any meeting. They haven't got the same sort of reluctance to say what they think as we learn as we get older, and they've got the useful bits that will carry it off. So I'm more than happy to go along with these recommendations. If we can include a young person, I would be really happy.
Thank you very much. I used to think I was a young councillor once, but I think we've just got Councillor Adams now, possibly, who's holding up that end for us. Councillor Herrick.
I'd like to echo sentiments, really. We appointed 2 independent people to ANG since, I think, just the past couple of meetings. They offer a very different perspective. Sitting outside the political sphere is kind of, I think, provides, you kind of get lost in it, even as a recent politician. You don't lose your entire perspective, but they give you a very different one. And I think that different perspective is important. I've had MYPs enthuse about the fact that this would be a great opportunity for them to widen their participation and participation for young people in general. We can obviously advertise and not appoint if we don't find people that are suitable. So I don't think we should kind of hold back on that front. And the ability to maybe try and really delve into wider demographics, because you look around this room and we're kind of like all in quite a very kind of well, just we're all kind of, we're all politicians, so we've all kind of got into that point, and I'll end there, I think.
Thank you. And then over to our young representation, Councillor Adams.
As a representative of the youth community now, I've actually had a bit of thought about this, which is quite dangerous. For standards, I do get it almost where you're judging other councillors. I think that's quite helpful. The question I have is, having 2 appointed members, is that a bit restrictive, sort of? So you mentioned the contribution. I've sat on Children's Overview and Scrutiny as a sub that our 2 absolutely amazing members of Youth Parliament make. If there's issues affecting young people, is there not the scope to invite them to the meeting to speak, much in the same way that the main O&S board did with property developers when there was the local plan consultation? I think we cover such a wide range, and so we've done play parks, we've done planning, we've done housing conditions, and we're going to do much more. I think it's very difficult to get it right, to get the right 2 people that cover it when we've all got networks. I imagine specifically that maybe the Green Party councillors I'm not making a generalisation, but you're probably quite connected to some Green groups, so sort of your Friends of the Earth and stuff, and there's probably a situation where they would make a very invaluable contribution, but that won't be every meeting. I'm still not sure, and I'm not convinced. I think there are situations where our members of Youth Parliament would love to come along and engage, because I remember one meeting when they were asked what was one thing we could do for them was to engage them in the wider council process. So I think we could do that without saying, let's get one young person and one person from this group, just to broaden the representation. I think on a case by case or meeting by meeting basis, I think we could put the offer out to those people that do need it. And I think wider engagement with the public isn't just having 2 members of the public sat on a board, it's encouraging more people to contribute and more groups that might be interested in specific things like play parks. Why don't we reach out to the local charities that run the parks and ask them to come along or put a representation in? I think we can achieve it without hiring 2 people, and I don't think it's particularly necessary. And it's not just the cost, because it's not a lot, but that's just my view, and I think I'm against it in the more I think about it. But yeah.
Thank you. Who we've got left? Councillor Northover.
I'm agreeing with Councillor Adams there, right? Because I think that it was quite a big effort to get elected as councillor, and I don't think we are necessarily that, for a lot of us, this is about the most impact we even have in anything in the council, being on a committee like this. And I don't think we're that sort of institutionalized into BCP necessarily. I would love, thinking back, you know, when we had the play parks, to have had some parents who use them maybe come along for that meeting, and that would be like, would have been excellent. So, but yeah, I don't know if yeah, having the same, unless I'm missing something here, I don't know whether or not there's certain people that can help always more than us. There's a danger that we might sort of pick people tokenistically, and you know, I think we are connected to lots of people. I feel like you know, I speak to lots of people on a wide range, and I think we are assuming that each of us don't have all sorts of things. We may have experienced poverty, maybe tenants ourselves, and had a lot of those things. I don't think we're massively privileged bunch, really. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay.
Thank you. I think that's it. I've not really set out my thinking on it, and I've been thinking about it quite a bit, and well, I find myself strangely stuck in between the two points of view here, and I would like to see co-opted members come onto this panel. I think giving a voice of people unaffiliated from politics, particularly away from it, and I think having that political neutrality, despite the fact that I think this committee and the way that we work together, we're doing very, very well at being politically neutral in everything that we're doing, and I commend all the committee members on that and keeping it that way. And I think we've had some really healthy debates, including this one as well. I think the benefit from having co-opted members, like Councillor Ricketts, I sat on standards for a period of time, and they gave some really valuable input to that committee. And again, seeing the members of the Youth Parliament on children's as well, I think they also have really, really welcome contributions to make. And I see this as an opportunity to be able to give to people an opportunity to get involved in something where maybe they would not have that opportunity so much. And Councillor Doughton Gibson, you alluded to it, and you've kind of, despite me disagreeing with you, you've kind of swung my feeling in the fact that I think when we go out and look for these people to come onto this committee, we should perhaps be looking at a different space to where the council has traditionally looked for members to come and join, and co-opted members, and look at our various diverse communities around BCP. People who maybe traditionally wouldn't feel empowered to engage with the council, or maybe who haven't engaged with the council a lot, who have experience in something which we might not, or just completely different views. And this isn't to say that we need people, a split of people either, maybe one who is extremely environmentally minded and someone who is not, to have that contrast of opinion. But people who can bring experience of the impacts of what we discuss here and how it impacts them on a day-to-day life, or their communities on a day-to-day life, wherever that might be, whether that is young people and people from ethnic minorities, other diverse people around BCP. So I would say that I would suggest, and I would move this paper and say that we go with the recommendations as set out, if I had a seconder for it, and we can take a bit on it. Councillor Ricketts, is that you wanting to second this paper?
Yes, I'm happy to second as set out.
Great. I'm aware, Councillor Martin, you've not spoke on this. Do you want? I'm not putting pressure on you, but I think if you wanted to share, now would be a good time.
I will do, Chair, just out of respect to my fellow committee members, because everyone else has said their opinion on it. I think you sort of summed it up quite well there, that I'm sort of stuck in the middle. I do sort of feel how things have changed in this election now, being on a councillor from my background and all the rest. I feel like I'm bringing something different, hopefully, to council, along with many of us. At the same time, if we are to do this, it would be great to actually look for, look at maybe places that have not been explored before to draw people from to come and be co-opted on. I think that would be like a great compromise to say, let's bring people on and do that. That would be why I would support this, on that sort of condition that we are quite creative with how we fill those positions.
Councillor Dalton Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just propose that we slightly amend the recommendation, therefore, to include a line along the lines of to increase the diversity? So, in other words, sort of almost explaining why we're doing this to try and get that more diverse background of people.
Yeah, Claire, can I ask you, are we able to add, how would we go about adding a recommendation in this situation?
It could, I don't know if it would work, but we could just add that into the very first recommendation. That's the reason for it. We could add that as part of the recommendation itself, if you're happy with that. Chair, sorry, just before you go and take the vote, it doesn't affect the vote at all, but I just wanted to make you aware that the person specification at the moment does say that it's has to be a person over 18. That there's also a recommendation that the wording of the person spec would be delegated to the chair in consultation with officers, so we can change that, but it'd be good to have a view from the committee if that's something you would like to change and consider.
Thank you. Yeah, that's sort of where I was going to go, and I think 18 maybe is a good place to be. Perhaps if there's been people who have been members of the youth parliament and are still here, we've got a couple of really good universities who've probably got people who would be able to represent. So I think if everyone's happy to keep it at 18, so we don't have to go into further safeguarding issues around the committee, then that would be quite good. So general consensus. If we are changing the first recommendation, I don't think we need to add it as a recommendation to it, but if this does go through, can we possibly engage our communities team to maybe get this out into places where perhaps it wouldn't normally be seen? Okay. Would anyone else like to speak before we go to the vote? Okay. All in favour of accepting the amended recommendations as set out, raise your hand. Thank you. Those against? And I think we've no abstentions. Okay, great. Thank you very much. That is carried by majority. And that takes us on to the final item, which is the work plan. The next meeting, we already have the agenda put together for that. And that's going to focus on the annual climate report. And that's just going to be it's actually going to be a 2-item agenda, not a 1-item agenda. The 1 item is going to be the annual climate, and the second part is going to be the actual climate team itself and how that fits into BCP Council as a whole, which I think we discussed around in the last meeting. We have the work programming workshop tomorrow evening between 6 and, well, from 6, I think it's 6 till 8. And that's attendance in person in HMS Phoebe, and it'd be great to see as many of you there as can make it, please. And the workshop after that will be on the 12th of February, and the same again. We are getting some really good value for those of you who haven't been to those. I think it's coming up quite well. Councillor Adams, do you want to say something?
I was just saying, could I preemptively give my apologies for tomorrow, but I will come to the next one, I promise, subject to no other plans. I haven't checked my diary, but when was the second one? The February, brilliant.
Thank you. We will accept your apologies for tomorrow. And on that, item 10 is the date of the next meeting, and the date circulated with the agenda was 6 p.m. on Wednesday, the 28th of February, 2024. And on that note, I can close the meeting. So thank you all for coming. Thank you anyone who's watching at home, and good night.